What's the most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Please do like, share, and subscribe. Had a reoccurring nightmare as a kid. Basically, I'd sleep in front of a structure that looked like a church mixed with a Greek temple. Every time I would see myself get dragged into the oversized entrance and watch myself get pulled into the darkness. Once engulfed, I always woke up. 18 years later, while in the military in Europe, not the continent where I grew up, I'm sent out on a recon mission for a month. We had to watch over a village that was destroyed by a landslide from atop a mountain. I found that building I dreamt of. It was one of the only buildings that wasn't destroyed and stood at about 2 kilometers away facing our camp. Lots of weird things happened on that deployment, and I'm happy I didn't get closer to that thing than needed. My old friend from middle school had a pretty old house that was pretty nicely renovated, along with a really nice basement. My friend would always tell me stories about what would go on in the house. Shadows would dash across the hallways, random chills, compressed chest feelings, footsteps, and creepiest being floating toothbrushes, saying that it was his grandma's house and that she still haunts the place. I brushed it off, being there a few times before, never really seeing anything. We had a sleepover one night and slept in the basement, where we had a blast playing video games all night long and just being kids. I was an early bird, so I woke up around 6 a.m. and not wanting to disturb anyone, I walked upstairs to just relax and just do my own thing. I was on the couch for a little while when I started hearing the plant to my right rustle quietly, which I ignored until it was unbearable to listen to. When I looked at it, it stopped moving. I looked back down at the book I was reading when it rustled again, this time not stopping when I looked at it. I then heard creaking, and the lights above the kitchen table started swinging back and forth, and the plant was still vigorously shaking. I decided, fuck this, and threw my book down and ran to the basement. When I started to run, there were another pair of footsteps sprinting right behind me. I ran downstairs, where it sounds like the steps stopped at the top. My buddy was now awake, asking why I was so loud. I told him what happened, hoping to get "it's probably just you scared" or something. Instead, he calmly explained, "That's why I decided we should sleep in the basement. When my grandma was still living in the house, this basement wasn't here, so she's never come down here." I went there again a good amount of times due to the fact we were good friends, where I experienced whispering and chills. Nothing as intense as what I experienced then. He still lives with his parents there and tells me she's been getting more aggressive to the point the whole family experiences stuff. I'm thankful I saw her when she was more chill. My life was saved as a baby by my mother hearing a clear, distinct male voice speak to her. No one else in the car. We were in hear that voice. "Check the baby," it said. She did. I was blue, ragdoll, and not breathing. No one heard the voice or spoke those words. Mom starts CPR. Dad floors it, driving up and down the pavement and against traffic at points. The last bit before the hospital saw him pass between the entrance to a pedestrian subway and a building at 30 miles per hour. He went back a few days later and realized that there was no physical way his car could have fit in that gap at any speed. I'm not a superstitious man at all, but this is the one story that I cannot explain. I was spending Christmas with a mate's family at their holiday home, which was in the middle of nowhere in the bush. There was about 10 to 12 of us, with 2 uncles who would be turning up that day. Anyway, the place that we were staying in was old. I'm talking at least 150 years old, and was likely used by some of the first white settlers to Australia. In one of the rooms was this old closet type thing. Think of the wardrobe from Beauty and the Beast, and that was the room that the youngest was going to be staying in because it had a single bed. The youngest kid was about 5 years old and was the son of one of the uncles that would be turning up the next day. So, anyway, I was walking around the house when I heard the kid talking to someone in the room. I thought that someone was there, so I walked in and said, "Hey, who are you talking to?" And the kid replied, "I'm talking to Charlie. He lives in the closet. He's my friend, and we're going to play more later." Naturally, I thought it was just him playing around and making an imaginary friend. So the next day, when we were having lunch and the uncles turned up, I said to him to tell his father about his friend. When the kid said, "Oh, that's just Charlie. We're going to play later one," the father grabbed his arm and said in a kind of panicked tone, "Where is Charlie, and what does he look like?" The kid responded, "He lives in the closet, in my room at the long coat on." Both of the uncles jumped up, ran into the room, dragged the closet outside and set it on fire. We all then left really quickly. I asked them both WTF happened, and they said, we used to play with Charlie as well when we were boys, and he always tried to get us to come play with him in the bush, away from the house. So, whatever it was that happened, it was enough to scare the shit out of two grown men when one of their grandsons... I fucked this story up royally, dude. I'll just reread this whole story at the end of the last file, if you want to use it, so I'll start the next one next. I work at an old-ass movie theater. My coworker and I were the only ones working on a Sunday, and it was super slow. We only had about 5 people in one of our theaters. Movie ends, people leave, and we clean, just going on about our jobs. As I was cleaning, I started hearing banging behind the actual screen, and then a huge crash. There's an old room located behind. I stop for a second and can hear faint whispering, which slowly gets louder. I freak out thinking someone broke in, so I grab my coworker, and both of us can hear the commotion behind the screen. We call the police and they arrive, finding everything perfectly in place and no one behind. Had us on edge for the rest of the night, and the officer thought we were crazy. Around 2006, while still at high school, I was going back home by bus. It was summer and very hot afternoon. I was the only person on the bus since most people avoid traveling during the heat. I was sitting in the back, only one more row of seats behind me. After a few minutes, a man appeared next to me, as if he stood up from the seat behind. I clearly saw his hand as he grabbed the rail and pressed the button for stop. His hand was of an old man with spots and wrinkles. He was wearing a bright orange suit. As I looked up to see his face, he disappeared. It didn't scare me, just confused. Several more minutes, it happened again. Again, I tried looking at his face and he disappeared. That game repeated for 2 to 3 more times until I got off the bus. My cat died in July. It was the 3rd pet death in 2 years, but she was my soulmate and I felt that deeper than any loss I've ever had. Sometimes when I'm missing her and I'm awake at night crying, I can feel her climb onto the bed and lay against my back on the pillow above my head, her spot, or right on my legs. I've seen her in the corner of my eye, and if I'm really lucky, I'll hear her little bell, but it doesn't happen often. When I was growing up, very young, my bed used to face the hallway out of my bedroom. At the end of this hallway was a bathroom. Every night down this hallway, figures would walk by, stop and wave, then walk directly into the bathroom. These figures were things that I knew but didn't know. Sometimes it would be Ernie from Sesame Street. Other times it could be a black odd creature that I had never seen before. But they always would stop, look at me, then continue down the hall. Every night also, my mom would come and tuck me into bed. This was a clockwork routine you do to your kids. Bedtime story, kiss, tucking goodnight, etc. One night, my mom didn't, and I remember calling her over and over again. Finally, after calling her, she walks down the hall and into my room. I remember her coming in. She didn't read to me, but she apologized and tucked the sheets in around me. She kissed me goodnight and told me she loved me. When she left the room, she didn't go down the hallway towards the rest of the house. She went towards the bathroom and didn't come back out. I remember sitting there watching the hallway and getting a sick feeling in my stomach. I waited a while, then I called for her. I didn't get a response. I remember getting up and going to the hallway to see if she was there. She wasn't. I was so freaked out, I ran down the other direction of the hallway to the rest of the house. All the lights were off, and I remember running to her room. She was asleep in her bed. I went to sleep with her that night, and in the morning I asked her if she came in and tucked me in. She told me she didn't, and that she was so tired she went to bed also. My 2 best friends and I went to a midnight premiere of Signs. That alone is why the 3 of us rarely tell people this incident. So, as we're driving down a road we traveled 1,000,000 times in order to get to one of our homes, my friend's headlights light up what we suspected was a dog on the side of the road. My friend slowed down because he feared the dog might run out into the road. This gave us time to better make out the features. The creature was on all 4s, had no tail or even fur, and was a solid charcoal color. But then, when we were maybe 20 yards away, it turned its head and looked at us. It only had a pair of eyes and no mouth. When we reached about 10 yards away, it stood up and walked into some bushes. I actually cried. I was so terrified by what we'd seen. What made it feel the most real, though, was that none of us said a single thing until we reached my friend's house. We were all so uncertain at what we'd seen, that we couldn't bring it up until my friend turned off his car and looked at me. We knew that all three of us had seen the same thing. Never knew what it could be, but we're all damn near 40 and still don't really talk about it. Science isn't that bad. I hope this takes off. I love these threads. When my cousin was a teen, late 80s, she remembers being in the car with her parents and her family dog. Suddenly, she said the world seemed to go quiet. Car noises faded, radio seemed muted, all except for her dog, who started losing it, barking at something through the back window. She looks out the back window and sees what she describes as a UFO behind them. She says the back seat of the car was suddenly flooded with a lot of green light, and she spotted something flying above and behind them that was neither a plane or helicopter. She struggled to gauge whether it was large or small. Her parents are reacting to none of this, not the dog, the light, the craft. They seem completely oblivious. Suddenly, the light goes, the dog settles. My cousin asks her parents WTF that was, and they noticed none of it and didn't believe her, though she was trying to prank them. My aunt is dead now, but my uncle has been forced to accept that my cousin wasn't lying that day, just because she talks about it still, and her story has never changed. When I was like 9 or 10, I was home with just my mom and my little brother who was sleeping. My stepdad was at work and my older sister was at a sleepover. Well, me and my mom were watching a movie and I got up to go to the bathroom. My bathroom is right next to the back door, and when I walked out of the bathroom, I swear I saw faces looking into the house, and I ran to my mom crying. She went to the back door and nothing was there. I still think about it till this day. Old house my family grew up in was haunted as F. Doors would forcibly slam open and shut. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Didn't matter if you were alone or with other people in the house, shit still happened. Hear footsteps and find nobody there. Stuff of that nature. Most memorable for me would be walking past my sister sleeping on the couch and her sitting up and turning to look at me. Only her eyes were still rolled back in her head, and all you could see were the whites of her eyes. She was unresponsive to me talking to her. Creepy enough, right? When I started to walk more, her head would turn to follow me. Went and got a friend staying at my house for the night, and she was unchanged. Creeped us out, so we went back into my room and locked the door. I'm not sure, but around 2013 or 2014, I had an assignment where I had to draw and stuff. I was 6 or 7. I and my dad went for a walk at 6 p.m. I said we had to buy this stuff, and he looked for shops near the street. It was already dark, and we went to this small shop, and the inside of it was fully white. Only the art supplies were the ones that gave color to the shop. The owner, or the guy or cashier, was an old man. He had this hat and a nice mustache. He smiled at me sweetly and even gave me free candy. I still remember that smile. It wasn't creepy, it was just an old man smiling. I don't know why, but I don't remember anything after that. I don't know how we returned or how I woke up in my bed. I asked my dad and he said he didn't remember anything. I didn't have the art stuff, but I had that wrapper, that exact candy wrapper. I got flashbacks of this a few days ago, and I had the chills. I'm not scared, but there's a feeling lingering in me that something's not right. If it was a dream, it was strangely real. If it was real, it was peculiar. Unfortunately, this one turned out to be explainable, so the ending is disappointing. For the longest time, I was convinced I had seen a ghost or had some sort of out-of-body experience. I vividly remember waking up somewhere I'd never been before, and a woman with long blonde hair and an old-fashioned white gown entering the room and walking toward me and calling my name. I closed my eyes in terror and kept them that way until I fell back asleep. This was my go-to ghost story for years because I could remember every single detail and was absolutely convinced it had happened. No way it was a dream. No one else had an explanation for it either. So, for over a decade, I would tell people that the story any time ghostly experiences came up. And then one day, I was looking through an old photo album and I found the ghost. It was a picture of my mom's friend Lori who lived near us. She looked differently than I was used to because she always worn her hair up since I knew her. And this was an older photo. I pieced together the circumstances and learned that when my mom was pregnant with my little brother, she went into labor in the middle of the night. Before driving her to the hospital, My dad scooped me out of bed and took me to Lori's house to look after me. I woke up confused, and Lori heard me moving and came to check on me. It was late, so she had her hair down and was in her nightgown. I was half asleep, confused to wake up in an unfamiliar place, and had never seen her like that, so I didn't recognize her. So yeah, for over 10 years, I spun the memory of being babysat by a neighbor into a terrifying ghost story. Early 2000s, I was at home with my dog, and he at times would stare at a certain spot and bark and act as though he could see someone, and we used to brush it off as him acting silly. Well, a few weeks later, I'm in the lounge. I could all of a sudden smell a sweet smell, almost like perfume, and my dog is going berserk at a certain part of the couch, barking, growling, and snapping. His ridge was showing, Rhodesian Ridgeback, and baring his teeth. Keep nervously looking at this spot and my dog. He wouldn't come or stop. This went on for about 5 minutes or so. So I picked him up and threw him onto the couch, and he freaked out, yelped, and ran with his tail between his legs into another room, and so did I. To this day, I swear there was something. What, I don't know, but something. Weird thing always happened in my house growing up. Hammering, footsteps, and random whistling were common occurrences. Before my family had moved in, the previous tenant's husband had committed suicide in our backyard, so we would always think it was him. The activity was never bad, just random, and my dad's sister had gifted us a Virgin Mary that would light up at night in hopes it would somehow protect us. This particular night, my mom had fallen asleep in the living room, and as to not wake her up, we had left her there with the Virgin Mary's light on in case she woke up and wanted to go back to her room. I was a teenager at the time, and commonly stayed up talking on the phone with my boyfriend into the night. I'm not very sure what time it was, but I remember I was laying in bed with the door to my room open. The light from the Virgin Mary came into my room so I could clearly see everything. I was laughing at something my boyfriend had said when I suddenly heard a loud crash next to my bed, followed by running footsteps. It sounded like a heavy box was dropped, so I quickly looked to see what had fallen but found nothing. I froze in fear for a bit. My boyfriend kept asking what that loud noise was and if I was okay. I was explaining the situation to him as I was getting up to turn on the light when my mom runs into my room, yelling at me that I had woken her up with all the running I kept doing in the living room. I tell her that it wasn't me and explain to her what had just happened. She just gives me a suspicious look and tells me to hang up the phone and go to sleep. I, of course, couldn't sleep that night and stayed up with the light on. We sometimes talk about that night, but we have no explanation as to what happened. A few have happened, but here's the most recent one. It happened a few months ago. So I have a pool table. This pool table is in the living room, and at time of this experience, I was in the kitchen and down the hall. I'm eating dinner with my parents and we're talking, and suddenly I hear the billiard balls move as if someone was playing pool. I'm not the only one who heard it. My dad heard it too. He abruptly stopped talking and looked at me, and I looked at him. My mom didn't hear it. She was distracted. I had the deepest chills I've ever felt, swear. We go to look, and there's no one in the living room. There's also no access to the living room without having to walk past the kitchen or walk in through the locked front door. I swear I heard the billiard balls hit, and I seriously swear even more because I'm not the only one who heard it. There's no explanation for why or how they moved. It's a flat table. It isn't slanted, and our air cannot move any of the balls on that table. It never has moved anything on that table. Other occurrences have happened in our house, but it isn't an old house at all. Some are freakier, others aren't so bad. The only explanation we could think of is that it could be our late relative. He suddenly passed away a few years ago, and it was a very hard time in our lives. These occurrences didn't start happening until after his passing. I went to another state to see a concert while my aunt was on her deathbed. She was in a coma for a bit of time, about a month, and at the end of a long battle with a rare autoimmune disease. Her family decided to dehydrate her until she passed. My dad didn't think it was a good idea for me to see her like that, so he encouraged me to follow through with my plans. The night before the concert, I was alone, camping in the back of an SUV, when all of a sudden I heard her voice yell at me, "Why did you let them kill me?" And it sounded exactly like her. And it was very shrill, and it was one of the weirdest things I've experienced. The next morning I got the call that she passed the evening before. I don't usually have auditory hallucinations.